what's up, everybody? I don't know if you've seen in the news recently, there was a Native American, so-called Native American tribe that has adopted 14 plus million, or allegedly it wants to adopt 14 million so-called white people into their ranks. Now, a lot of these same nations that's trying to do that, these are the same nations now that basically put out an edict before where they were trying to get rid of all of the so-called black or slave descendant Cherokees out of the so-called Cherokee Nation. The Supreme Court found that to be illegal, and based on that now they had to allow them back in. The problem with that is that we have to understand that how we come into something is usually how we leave it. So what they want us to believe is that tribes like the Cherokee and the Seminole and these people like that were so-called phenotypically looking like the so-called Native Americans that existed after 1899. When we know that that's not really true. We know the original Chata Nation, the original Charatagi, the original Mesquite, or what they call Muskogee, Narragansett, Nanticoke, Delaware, Montauk, Abenaki, Wabanaki. All of these so-called clans and tribes or nations were all Muslims prior to 1899. Don't let them fool you. Don't let them make you think that they wasn't Moors. Don't let them make you think that they were not the Alamadacanos or Stados. They were that. The problem was after 1899, most of these people that you see as Native American at a lot of these powwows and stuff, a lot of these people got that understanding of what it means to so-called be Indian, right? After and based on the Buffalo Bill's Wild Wild West show. And this was a show just like Birth of a Nation. How you had Birth of a Nation come out and basically promote the KKK that led to over, 200 and some odd years of brutal terrorism. The same thing happened with the Buffalo Bill Wild Wild West show in making a lot of people believe that they were actually more native than they really were.
Kind of like how Hollywood does now.
Exactly. Exactly. How they did with Exodus, Gods of Egypt, where everybody that's doing the work in so-called Egypt is so-called melanated, but then the ruling class all happen to be white people who at the time, or if this really did happen, they were in the caves and stuff like that. What we have to understand is that there is a old adage that says those who do not know their history will be doomed to repeat it. And so what's happening now is that there's a revisionist history going on where they want us to believe that, again, not only do we come from Africa, but worse, that we were slaves here in this country, when really that's not really how it all went down. What really happened was,
and that's not everybody's
story. But right. for some reason, if you're this color, that's what is supposed to be your story, regardless of whether you was born here or not. And that is a problem, because what that does is it gives us a false sense of inferiority, and it gives another people a false sense of superiority. When these people that they talk about who are Native Americans and Grand Chieftains today, talking about the ones that's opening the casinos and all this other stuff, they are all descendants of people from Tartary. And how can we prove this? This is because way back in the days, there was an empire in ancient China called the Xiang Dynasty. And the Xiang decided, under a man named Hu Xian, another Moor, decided to come over here and find their cousins, who they referred to as the Western Ixi, or Ixet, or Yi. And so when they came here, they found an Olmecs here that was already here from time immemorial, and they both merged their culture. When that culture merged together, they became one people. And then out of that people, we get the people today we call the Hopi, the Anasazi, the so-called Pueblo cultures, and all of that, right? It wasn't until maybe 16,000 years later, when the Hindus was exiled from India by the Sindhi Moors, or the Moors from Old Bombay and all of that, kicked them out. After the Hindu invasions, they all was brought over in boats and brought over here. When they came here, they then mixed with the so-called autochthon or Aboriginal people who were already here, and then those Aboriginal people allowed them to stay in a certain area. And they adopted them into certain aspects of the culture. This is where you get people called the Mixtecs and the Zapotecs and the Toltecs and these type of people. They were all descendants from the Olmecs. Now the Olmec people, the original constituency, started to move further up. They started to move further up from La Venta, Palenque, Chichen Itza, and move further up into what we would now call the Midwestern United States, and then further, and then after a certain amount of time, they dwelled there and then started to disperse into
Migrate.
sub-tribes and nations. Some of those sub-tribes and nations, one of the biggest one was called the Yamasee. I don't know if any people saw the movie Apocalypto, but in that movie there was a blue dye that they were painting the people who were going to be sacrificed in. That blue dye actually comes from red clay that's found in Georgia, the red clay in Georgia. And it was an old custom that the queens would ingest some of the red clay in Georgia because it would help with the magical properties that they were trying to pass on to the babies. And a lot of Autochthon people still do that to this day. So what happened was the Yamasee Nation basically...
What happened was...
the Yamasee Nation established themselves in what we call Georgia and all that.
We have
and then
like
one of the sub...
battery life.
And then one of the... I'm sorry.
And one of the sub... I'm sorry.
And then one of the sub-nations called the Southern Cree and then the Northern Creek decided to go against and fight the Yamasee. There was a big war between that, and then the Yamasee basically lost the war, and their women were then brought in as squaws, meaning captured queens, to populate with the Cree, the Northern Cree, and the Southern Creek. And once they had those babies, that became another nation now. That nation was then known as the Seminole. And then the Seminole were then given land back down in what we right here call Andalusia, and they came back down here. That's why around the time of Santa Anna, Santa Anna, who was the Moor that ruled Old Mexico, that's why when the Seminoles agreed to go back to Mexico, it was okay because that was the ancient ancestral lands of their forefathers, the so-called Olmecs in them. But what modern history today has told us is that the word Seminole means runaway slave. And so the so-called ancient Big Buffalo people, that's another name for us, the Big Buffalo people, the ancient bison riders is what they used to call us. All of that history was then redone and reconstructed between the years of Manifest Destiny, let's say around 1854 to, let's say, 1899. And after Reconstruction stopped with Rutherford B. Hayes. And then in that, then they started to supplant the fact that anybody dark-skinned was basically a slave from Africa, which is not true. And anybody who was of the reddish hue or mixed with us, right, who could trace their descendancy back to the Olmecs, those people had to be wiped out. So you have to understand, between 1492 and, let's say, 1899, we're talking about over 120 million Muslims from Alaska to Chile, who were all Moors and were all so-called Autochtons, who had turbans and feathers and all of that. That whole history was redone and redistributed under this new Native American history, by which the forefathers and the foremothers of these people who call themselves Native Americans today, right, they looking at us like we're descendants from them, when really they're descendants from us. That's why they're still wards of the state and the Moors are totally free. So in order for anybody to really get back to where they need to go, we all need to understand where we came from. And because if you don't know where you came from, you won't know where you're going. So again, I just wanted to get it straight and let you know that you are what your forefathers and ancestors were today. So when it comes to your ancient history as Almaracanos, meaning Almaracanos Estados, a Moorish estate that was always here, there are books and stuff like that you can get. There's a book called African Presence in Early America. There's another book called When Nations Gather by Sultan Abdul Latif. There's another book called Othello's Children in the New World by Jose Pimenta Bay. There's another book called The Diplomatic Relations with the United States and the Barbary Powers by Edwin. There's another one called The Wars in Barbary by Chidsey. There's another book called Ancient Asiatic Kingdoms in America by Barry Fell. Another one by Barry Fell named Saga America. Another one called America BC. You want to start to get these books so that way you can debunk this. So that way when you show up at the powwow and everything with your feathers and your headdress and your fez and all of that, and they start talking to you like, what you doing here, you can look at them and say, I've been here.
Word. Ashe. Thank you. Peace.